Hey guys, it's Cyze. So, with 10.1 right around the corner, the time has come to ask, what is the current state of Shadow Priest? Now, I'll be doing two types of these videos. One will be more focused on raids and the new encounters in Aberrus, the Shadow Crucible, and the other one will be more focused on Mythic Plus. So, feel free to hang around and subscribe to be notified when the other video will be coming up in a few days. Today, though, we are specifically looking at raiding. How does Shadow hold up in Aberrus compared to Vault of the Incarnate, and more importantly, how does it feel to play in comparison to the current builds and the current patch? So in this video, we'll get into the meat of it all, and I just want you to bear in mind all of the opinions that I share with you today are mine and mine alone. You know, there will be other people that will challenge this, there'll be other people that have their own opinions, and I encourage that more than anything, and I encourage you guys to share your opinions in the comments section down below so we can have a mature discussion on it. And feel free to share them in the Shadow Priest Discord as well. Everybody in there loves having discussions. They love hearing different points of views. And hopefully it'll bring up some really good points that we can talk about and move on with. So, just to get into it all, how accessible is the spec now with the new changes and the rework? So, I have actually gone over the rework as a whole in another video, so feel free to check those out separately. But that does mean I'll gloss over a few things in this video to get into the meat of it all. So, for example, I won't be going and talking in depth about the new talent changes or the new rework of abilities. I'll just mainly be talking about how it holds up in raid compared to 10.07 in Vault of the Incarnate versus the Aberrus raid. So, how accessible is it? So, from the changes from 10.07 to 10.1, Shadow has become a lot easier in terms of can I pick up this class and play it decently without having to do loads of in-depth diving, loads of different builds and guides and checking out all that stuff. Can somebody pick up the spec and play it relatively decently? So there isn't a clear-cut answer, but it's a lot easier than it was. So beforehand, you've got to bear in mind we had upwards of 3 procs that we had to consider on a rolling basis, such as Mind Blast through Shadowy Insight procs. We had Mind Spike through Mind Blast and Mind Melt, and Mind Devourer procs on Mind Seer and Devouring Plague, just to name a few. That's quite a lot for the average person to keep on top of, especially if they're new to the spec and they see these abilities and these procs lighting up and they're just pressing them and they don't really know what priority order they go in, and that's okay. For those of us that have played it for quite a while, we're used to that. We're used to all the procs. We're used to Shadow being a bit clunky and feeling a little bit heavy in terms of the amount of buttons we have and button bloat. So Blizzard actually reached out and spoke about this in a blue post, and one of their main goals was to reduce the button bloat in the spec. And their way of doing this was kind of removing Mindseer, right? So not just Mindseer, but they've also replaced Mind Flay Insanity with Mind Spike if you choose the talent into Mind Spike. So a lot of the complications there were mainly people thinking, I've got 2 single target spenders, builders. So they had Mind Flay and they had Mind Spike. And a lot of people were confused in terms of when do I press which one. So that being a massive headache for the average Shadow Priest player, and most of the questions that we got in the Shadow Priest Discord was purely, when do I use my filler? What filler do I use in this scenario? And there wasn't really an answer for all of it, because different scenarios demand different types of damage. If you can plant your feet and hard cast and get a full Mind Flay Insanity, that's what you wanted to do. If you had to move and you had a Surge of Darkness proc, you would just press your Mind Spike. But for a new player coming into the spec, this wasn't all common knowledge. So Blizzard removed this headache and has actually took away some of these procs, or they've changed how some of the talents work. So they took away Mind Seer, so Mind Devourer now only works for Devouring Plague. And Mind Melt went from being a build-up of a Mind Blast instant cast to a critical strike chance increase versus the stacks to give you that instant Mind Blast. So a lot of what I personally saw in the class Discord was questions revolving around when a player should use a certain proc and whether or not they should prioritise a certain ability over another. And it was always situation based, so it was in this scenario, and it's very easy to answer those questions when it's in this situation, what should I do? But the vast majority of people don't give that scenario, if that makes sense. So a lot of people are saying, do I press Mind Flay or do I press Mind Spike, without giving any context? And it's really hard to answer that question. But people tried to reach out and people tried to help, and that's amazing. So the general consensus was people were struggling in terms of priority. So Blizzard, for Blizzard to step in and address this themselves, whether or not it was intentional or whether or not it was, something that they've been working on for a little while and they wanted to try out, it is actually rather beneficial for the player base as a whole. And once again, I'm not particularly phased either way because I was happy to keep with all the procs and the button bloat because I knew how to manage it. Same with a lot of other Shadow Priests, and that's why they're struggling a little bit with coming to terms with why have all this been changed, why are they changing it for the general population when they've left it with us for so long, right? And I get the frustration, but Blizzard's goal is to get more people to play the spec, right? People want to be playing this without all these complaints, and Blizzard want people to try it out. So again, for those of us that have played it for long enough to understand the complexities behind it, that's amazing, but not everybody does. So a lot of the changes in the reworks are actually beneficial when it comes to Aberrus, the Shadow Crucible, the new raid, because it might turn out to be more enjoyable for the vast majority of players, especially newer players, when the rotation is rather easy to get into, and all the changes make this more achievable for the average player. So with accessibility out of the way, does our toolkit inherently suit Aberrus and its many raid encounters? So whilst a lot of tuning and testing has definitely been going on with the PTR testing, they've added up every single weekend pretty much, normal, heroic, and then obviously the scheduled mythic as well. And the simulation craft has been ran pretty much every single day. I've seen public working on it in the Shadow Discord. He's always got it going. He's always trying to test out new builds and new sims. So props to him for that. Like, the vast majority of Shadow Priests that actually play the game and put out the videos don't know how to do any of that stuff. So to have people like Jarv and Public and Sailjudge, the guys that can actually go in and do these simulation crafts and make it a hell of a lot easier for the rest of us, especially me, because I can just say, its sim's looking good, this is a nice build you can play because this is what it's simmed at. And again, all of that information comes from Public and his team over there at the Warcraft Priest Discord, so please give them all the credit for any sims that I ever show you in future. Just putting that out there because I don't take credit for any of that, but it is extremely useful information and it allows me to make the videos that I make for you guys as well. So I wanted to say that everything is subject to change in this new raid, especially with the rework and the changes to the talent and changes to how our spec plays. It is all subject to change, as I warn you with every single patch. So the raid, however, does have a variety of style boss encounters which suit Shadow relatively well. There are some that are pure single target, but we're actually leaning towards that as Shadow, right? A lot of people really enjoy the fact that as a Shadow Priest, you can put in this single target funnel and do really well on single target. Some people prefer the cleave and the dot style, but I actually really like being able to stand there and turret out with single target, especially now that we're leaning more towards the Mind Spike build, where you're standing still, you're turreting, you're getting your Cthulhu procs with your tentacles. And you've got Void Mind Spike that you can hard cast now, because there's no instant procs, it's just your filler if you choose to take it over Mind Flay Insanity. So with some bosses being like that, there are of course little niche situations where you might have to move quite a lot and then you have to lean more on your feathers and your dispersion or your positioning as a player, and that's all things that you can work on yourself. So I will just speak from my own experience in PTR testing, but there are a mix of pure single target encounters with moderate to a lot of movement. So, for example, Kazara, the first raid of the encounter first boss of the raid, sorry, is mainly single target. It's pure single target, but there is quite a lot of movement. So there are parts in the fight where you can stand still and you can hard cast and you can get all your mind spikes out and you can pop your CDs and you can do relatively good opener. But after that, you're getting loads of your tornadoes, you're getting loads of your magma pulls, you've got to run around quite a lot. So that's where you're really going to be leaning on your utility as a Shadow Priest through feathers, gripping other people after they've been kiting their tornadoes so they can get back into the fight and do a lot more single target damage. So you've got to bear in mind, the raid doesn't just suit Shadow because of its damage profile, it actually suits Shadow because we offer quite a bit of utility and we have quite good survivability, especially with, your self-defensives in terms of being able to flash heal and take a reduced amount of damage, your fade, your powered shield, your dispersion, as I mentioned before. All of these are very nice in the new raid because there are a lot of damage windows and damage patterns that line up quite well with Vampiric Embrace, and you're able to do a lot more healing, especially now that Blizzard put out some patch notes last night where they're actually nerfing Leech for the majority of people, which means that off healing, Nature's Vigil, Ancestral Guidance, and Vampiric Embrace are a lot more useful to a raid leader and a raid as a whole. So, just talking about the fights again, Molgoth is primarily two target, which rotates into a single target burn in phase 2, but you can make a lot of use of our amazing 2-target cleave in phase 1, because now with the rework, all your single target damage just gets replicated. Your Devouring Plague gets replicated, your damage from Void Torrent, your Mind Space. It's very nice to actually have Psychic Link work for Devouring Plague, because you're doing your single target rotation, you're using your procs, you're building, you're spending, and it's cleaving to everybody with your dots on. So that's really nice. So Skarn as well is also a fight quite similar to Broodkeeper, where there are quite a lot of rotating ads in the form of the golems, but you can dot them up, fully focus on your single target rotation on the boss, and with the new iteration of Psychic Link, as I've mentioned, you lose nothing by funneling Devouring Plagues into the boss. You're going to be passively cleaving these ads and doing quite a lot of damage in that process. So the pattern does continue in this manner in the raid with, a few single target priority window bosses, filtered with some additional targets that you can cleave off on, making it a relatively good raid for Shadow as a whole. But on the surface, we maintain our damage over time abilities and all relevant targets, we funnel single target damage with Devouring Plague, and we deal relatively strong cleave damage through the Psychic Link. I would also like to point out, though, that from testing, a lot of these fights in Abras actually feel relatively quick or short in terms of the kill times, and whilst this is likely to change with Blizzard through health being buffed or phases being altered to being a percentage or time-based, it does show potential for having really good damage windows in relation to our Dark Ascension, our Void Eruption, our Power Infusion, your Shadow Gem Trinket, for example. It all lines up pretty well, and it means that the shorter the fights are, the quicker you're going to be killing the boss, the more damage you're going to be able to be putting out with your damage cooldown windows. It also gives us a bit of flexibility in being able to choose Void Eruption versus Dark Ascension. There's still sims going on with that. But in a raid encounter where you'll obviously have more 1 minute rotating cooldown windows, you're going to be getting more Dark Ascensions out, you're going to be doing a lot more damage. But in terms of how does it feel overall, because I know I've waffled on quite a lot, but the general consensus is Shadow in the new raid feels good. I haven't yet had a fight where I felt out of my depth. I didn't have a fight where I felt like I couldn't do damage. There was a lot of utility, like I said, in terms of the Vampiric Embrace. Having all that extra healing, especially in your damage window, you can do a lot of off-healing for your raid. I mean, there's a reason that raid leaders or healing officers, whoever you have in your guild, assigns this as a healing cooldown. So, again, I know a lot of people look at a new raid and they think, can I do damage in this raid? But a lot of it as well is, do I fit into this composition? Because depending on how high you are in terms of world rank with your guild, being able to fit into a raid assignment, for example, with your Vampiric Embrace, your Power Infusion, makes you a lot more appealing to a raid leader, and this raid is suitable for Shadow because of that. Especially with all the dot damage you do, you're focusing more on dot, you're able to cleave a lot more. Passive cleave as well being one of the big things, there's a reason that a lot of balance druids are taken to bosses where there's a lot of ads, because they don't lose anything by pressing Starfall. And now we're in the same boat by, we're not losing anything because all of our damage is cleaved from our Devouring Plague, which is our spender onto the boss. It's very nice. And, there will be some more videos coming up on the channel before the raid comes out, showing you some examples of boss fights from the new raid, some testing that I did, maybe some Warcraft logs, and I'll try and get that out to you sooner rather than later, as well as some PTR Mythic Plus dungeons being ran as well. So maybe you can see the new, the new dungeons that are out, new/old, because I'm quite interested in seeing how it holds up in terms of Mythic Plus damage, going from this patch to the next. I know there's some changes, but the damage profile of Shadow doesn't really change much, other than the fact that we've lost out on that Mind Seer. But we still do have pretty good AoE cleave and a nice little bit of burst damage from you've still got your Halo, you've still got your Shadow Crash, your Devouring Plague means that on a typical fortified week, you've got some mobs that have more health than others, and that means you can still focus on doing your priority damage to that target and still not losing out, still being able to use that inescapable torment from your Mindbender. That's still pretty nice. So you've still got quite a lot of open and burst AoE damage, and this fits into the raid as well. So at the minute, there are quite a few builds that you can test out in terms of raiding, and there'll be quite a few different builds that you play in different fights. So that's really nice to me as well, because I don't know about you guys, but it gets quite boring playing the same build every single raid fight, and I know you become comfortable with it, you become better at it, but in terms of engagement and having fun in a raid, I like swapping out talents. So it seems that in this raid we will be swapping out for quite a few different builds. Maybe you'll be focusing more on your Insanity versus Mind Spike if it's a movement heavy fight, and we'll just have to wait and see. But I think I've waffled on for quite a while now. I appreciate anybody that stuck through this long. You know, I did have some clips in the background, just some raid testing that my friend SOLANIS did. I know quite a few people have been messaging him saying, do you know Cyze? Like, he's been putting up your content on YouTube and he's having to explain to them, yeah, he's had permission. I have full permission. He's a really close friend and he does a lot more testing than me recently because I've had a lot of real life stuff going on. But I am planning on getting onto the PTR before the patch comes out and testing out some of these new things for you guys. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for watching. I appreciate all the support as always. Feel free to like if you like the video. Feel free to subscribe if you want to keep your eyes open for that Mythic Plus video that's coming out as well as some future Shadow Priest guides. I know one of my best videos that I did was a Shadow Priest guide because as much as the Icy Veins and WoW Head and all those are updated by amazing people, not all of them transfer that into a video, and a lot of people learn visually from seeing somebody play the game. So I do think that's one of my pretty nice things where I can put it into a video for you guys, so you guys can actually physically see what's going on and why I'm making the decisions I'm making. But I have started streaming again as well properly, over on twitch.tv/Scouse, by the way. Um, I do Vault of the Incarnate raids, I do High Mythic Plus, so feel free to pop over there and follow that if you'd like, guys, as well. But with that, thank you for watching. I hope you have a great day and take care.